Hollywood lied. Atlantis is not a lost underwater metropolis with UFO tech and magic gems. If you believe that, blame Victorian crackpots and blockbuster fantasies for twisting Plato's 4th century BCE allegory into fake history. The Atlantis you know is a Victorian-era myth, fueled by Ignatius Donnelly's wild 1882 book that treated Plato's dialogues like tourist brochures instead of moral parables. No ancient Greeks logged expeditions there. Plato created Atlantis in Timaeus and Critias purely as a cautionary tale, not a real place to visit. Modern archaeology, detailed in thousands of articles from Nature and Smithsonian in the 2000s, found 0 Atlantean ruins unless you count lost hotel keys at the bottom of the sea. If you still swear Atlantis was a factual civilization, congratulations, you fell for ancient fake news centuries before social media even existed. Plato would have muted half of Atlantis Twitter for totally missing the point. This belief was so strong that even the Victorians accepted the literal existence of Atlantis. You've been fed lies by dusty Victorians with wild imaginations. They're the culprits behind the myth that Atlantis was a real, sunken city waiting for tweed jacket explorers. Blame your textbooks on mutton-chopped imperialists whose real talent was weaving grand myths. Here's the truth. Victorians did not genuinely believe Atlantis was out there, Indiana Jones style. The real spark came from 19th century figures like Ignatius Donnelly, an American congressman who ravenously devoured Plato's 4th century BCE satire, and in 1882 dropped Atlantis, the antediluvian world, the fever dream that gripped Europe's elite obsessed with lost civilizations. Ancient Greeks weren't fooled. Plato's Critias was a philosophical fable, not a travel map. Classical scholars for centuries agreed Atlantis was allegory, not a tourist destination. Victorian archaeology uncovered no sunken utopias, only convenient justifications for Western imperialism disguised as destiny. If you believed Victorians proved Atlantis existed, congrats, you fell for the granddaddy of ancient alien conspiracy theories. Next up, Victorian PowerPoint pitches selling Atlantis timeshares. Their conviction was fueled by tales that Atlantis sank suddenly in a catastrophic event. You've been fed the biggest Hollywood lie, Atlantis vanishing overnight faster than your favorite TV show gets axed. If you believe this disaster movie nonsense, blame blockbuster hype, not history. Pop culture hijacked Plato's 4th century BCE legend and turned it into cosmic cataclysm fantasy. Everyone imagines Atlantis disappearing in a Poseidon-fueled apocalypse, as if the gods slammed a divine delete button. Thank Disney's Atlantis, the Lost Empire, and those Victorian-era archaeologists obsessed with lost civilizations for this Hollywood myth. Open Plato's dialogues, and Atlantis' destruction is mostly allegory, no volcanic fury, no hint it sank in a single day. Real ancient texts and archaeological digs from Santorini to Bimini offer 0 proof of a city wiped out overnight. The Santorini eruption, 1600 BCE, left slow-building geological clues, confirmed by modern surveys. If instant doom were true, we'd spot massive underwater ruins by now. Instead, since the 1990s, scientists only find gradual change. So next time you hear Atlantis sank faster than a blockbuster video store, ask yourself, are you swallowing facts or streaming another Sharknado sequel? Such dramatic endings contributed to portrayals of Atlantis as a high-tech and futuristic civilization. You've been completely conned, and you can blame Hollywood and kooky New Age charlatans. Atlantis is a laser-blasting, submarine-riding sci-fi superpower. That is total modern fantasy, not ancient reality. If you believed Atlantis was some lost high-tech civilization with flying cars, energy crystals, and underwater glass cities, you fell for a Hollywood-fueled fairy tale. This absurd image exploded thanks to early 20th century spiritualists and movies like Disney's Atlantis: The Lost Empire. But here's the truth bomb: Plato never described any of this. Pop culture has utterly butchered his story. Crack open Plato's Timaeus and Critias from the 4th century BCE, and what do you get? A Bronze Age nation cranking out chariots and basic naval vessels. 0 ray guns, no magical crystals, no robot armies. Those outlandish ideas stem from fringe writers like Ignatius Donnelly, whose 1882 book was pure fantasy, disguised as history. If you ever bought an Atlantean energy crystal online, congrats. You just got ripped off by a scam older than clickbait. Still hunting for Atlantis on Google Maps. Newsflash, the only thing you'll uncover is disappointment. Better luck hunting UFOs or Bigfoot. Alongside their advanced technology, Atlantean society was imagined as peaceful and utopian. You've been sold a massive lie, blame every Hollywood Atlantis disaster movie, and feel-good New Age book for turning ruthless ancient warmongers into beachside yogis. For centuries, Atlantis has been paraded as a lost utopia, crystal palaces, Zen gardens, even futuristic vegan tech, all pure fantasy. 20th century Hollywood and New Age gurus brutally twisted Plato's original warning. In his 4th century BCE works Timaeus and Critias, Atlantis wasn't some peaceful paradise, it was a brutal empire hell-bent on conquering Greece. Plato called out the Atlanteans as corrupted tyrants who launched reckless wars and were wiped out for being historic jerks. Archaeologists have found 0 peaceful Atlantean ruins because, spoiler, Atlantis never existed. Victorian spiritualists rewrote history to sell their crystal-obsessed fantasies. If you still buy into Zen Atlantis, congratulations, you just swallowed the world's oldest fake travel brochure. Given its allure, many continents have claimed to be the true location of Atlantis. Everyone thinks Atlantis is hiding under their backyard pool, but Hollywood lied to you by treasure hunters, tourism boards, and especially Victorian-era grifters. You've binged History Channel reruns and wondered, could it be under Spain or the Bahamas? Newsflash, someone sold you a ticket to nowhere. Here's the scam pop historians and slick PR machines push the fantasy that every continent has a shot at hosting Atlantis. Africa, America, Europe, pick any spot, and there's a wild Atlantis conspiracy glued to it. This mess exploded after the Victorian era, when Jules Verne knockoffs and pseudo-academic societies sparked a worldwide Atlantis feeding frenzy. Reality check Plato, in his 4th century BCE dialogues Timaeus and Critias, anchored Atlantis just west of Gibraltar. No Bahamas beaches, no Bolivian togas. Jump to the 1920s, Ignatius Donnelly pitched Atlantis as the motherland of every ancient culture. Archaeology. Forget it, pure fantasy. So next time someone hypes the Bimini Road or claims Bolivia is Atlantis, congrats, you just fell for history's biggest timeshare scam. If Atlantis is everywhere, your local swimming pool might be next. Brace yourself for the Atlantis of Central Park. These claims were often supported by so-called ancient maps depicting Atlantis. You've been hoodwinked by a shady mix of fringe authors, charlatan antiquarians, and those clickbait History Channel specials. The myth that ancient maps secretly charted Atlantis isn't just wrong, it's a modern fairy tale dressed up in fake tea-stained parchment. If you believed some centuries-old manuscript pinpointed the lost city beneath the waves, think again. Victorian-era explorers and mid-20th century bestsellers fanned this bogus flame, with every Atlantis documentary tricking you into thinking 10 marks the sunken spot. Here's the brutal truth: not a single genuine ancient map, from antiquity through the Renaissance, ever shows Atlantis. Take the Piri Reis map from the early 16th century. Stored in Istanbul's Topkapi Palace archives, it's a sloppy sketch of South America and Antarctica, nothing to do with Atlantis. Or the infamous Vinland map. Yale scientists in the early 2000s exposed its medieval ink as modern forgery, fresher than your smartphone's touchscreen. Unless Plato moonlighted as a cartographer, Atlantis never appeared on any map before his 4th century BCE writings. Believing in ancient Atlantis maps is like trusting Google Earth to reveal the lost city of Narnia. If you still buy into this, congratulations, you've just fallen for a Victorian snake oil salesman's digital print scam. However, the myth of Atlantis itself is largely unique to Western culture. You've been sold a fantasy by Victorian scholars, and Hollywood Atlantis, the ultimate lost civilization, is not just a Western obsession, it's a global hallucination they want you to believe is purely Greco-European. If you swallowed that lie, you've been hoodwinked. Longing for sunken cities isn't some Plato pipe dream or Spielberg's playground, it's universal, ancient, and relentless. Most people naively picture Atlantis as a quirky Greco-Western myth, a lost island swallowed by the sea, haunting Western imaginations alone. Blame 19th century Victorian archaeologists desperate to crown lost European glories, plus pulp writers and Hollywood who force-fed Atlantis into every Indiana Jones knockoff, since the roaring 1920s. But here's the cold, hard fact: the ancient Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, dating back to the 3rd millennium BCE, delivers the original apocalypse, a catastrophic flood wiping out humanity. India's Mahabharata, compiled between the 8th and 4th centuries BCE, describes Dwarka, a magnificent city swallowed by the ocean. Underwater ruins discovered in the 1990s confirm it. Aztec legends of Aztlan and Andean stories of lost islands. Same myth, different hemisphere. So if you thought Atlantis was a Western exclusive, that's like believing TikTok trends end at the Atlantic Ocean. Congratulations, you just missed the worldwide binge watch of ancient flood myths. Yet enthusiasts point to underwater ruins as physical proof of Atlantis' existence. You've been ripped off by Discovery Channel documentaries and clickbait headlines. Not every suspicious underwater rock is Atlantis, people. Hollywood and pseudo-archaeologists have woven a fantasy so convincing, even your conspiracy-loving aunt is hooked. If you believed every oddly shaped stone on the ocean floor was a lost Atlantean metropolis, think again. Movies like Disney's Atlantis, The Lost Empire, and History Channel specials push the myth that real archaeologists are moments from confirming Plato's sci-fi travelogue. Here's the brutal truth: the so-called Bimini Road in the Bahamas. Geological surveys led by Eugene Shin in the 1970s show it's just fractured beach rock. No ancient Atlantean construction crew ever laid a single slab. The Yonaguni Monument in Japan. Its biggest advocate, geologist Masaaki Kimura, admits even now that natural weathering carved those shapes, not legendary stoneworkers. And Plato's original Atlantis tale from the 4th century BCE. Oxford classicist Julia Annas in the early 2000s confirms it's pure allegory, nothing real. If you've been chasing Atlantis, you're overlooking genuine marvels like Pavlopetri in Greece, a real underwater city with no crystal submarines or magic crystals. So if you fell for the evidence of Atlantis, congrats, you just bought into the ancient world's version of those ridiculous "you won't believe what scientists found at the bottom of the ocean" clickbait videos. Notably, the Nazis sought such evidence to legitimize their ideology of Aryan superiority. Hollywood lied to you. The Nazis did not mount a globe-trotting quest for Atlantis to prove Aryan supremacy. If you believed this myth, fueled by trashy 20th century pseudoscience and movies like Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade, you've bought into one of the biggest historical fabrications. Thanks to 1970s conspiracy pulp, everyone thinks Hitler's henchmen crisscrossed the planet, convinced Atlantis held Aryan roots. The reality: the Nazi Ahnenerbe, their real occult research unit, barely glanced at Atlantis, as historian Heather Pringle reveals in her 2006 book, The Master Plan. They obsessed over Norse legends, not mythical tridents. Plato's Atlantis myth was revived by Victorian eccentrics in the 19th century, long before Nazis even grabbed a shovel. If you seriously got hooked on Nazis scuba diving for sunken empires, congratulations, you've binged more History Channel nonsense than a retired conspiracy theorist binge-watching Area 51 documentaries. Some theories suggest Atlantis' story draws from ancient Egyptian records. You've been conned by centuries of pseudo-history, thanks to Victorian romantics and Hollywood liars who want you to swallow the myth that Atlantis was preserved in ancient Egyptian scrolls. Here's the brutal truth: they're inventing it on the spot. Everyone gobbles up the fantasy of Atlantis as an Egyptian bedtime tale, waiting for the next Indiana Jones knockoff to unearth it. Hollywood pumps out scenes of daring archaeologists unfurling mystical papyri, while 19th century eccentrics like Ignatius Donnelly wildly mashed Plato's Atlantis with Egyptian civilization, despite their evidence being foggier than the Nile Delta at dawn. If you believe this, it's time for a reality check. Atlantis appears only in Plato's Timaeus and Critias from the 4th century BCE. Not a single Egyptian inscription, papyrus, or tomb wall mentions Atlantis. Since the 19th century, scholars have ransacked every temple and scroll, finding zero proof. So if you're hunting for Atlantis in hieroglyphs, you might as well look for Hogwarts in the Dead Sea Scrolls, or expect to spot Bigfoot texting on your smartphone. In particular, the idea of Atlantis' destruction parallels volcanic eruptions, like that of Santorini. You've been fed lies again. Every time someone claims Atlantis was the volcanic ruin of Santorini, Thank 20th century pseudo-historians and clickbait-hungry documentaries. Hollywood wants you imagining Atlantis as a real city, incinerated by fire and ash, but it's time to burn down the myth that Plato was reporting a Bronze Age natural disaster. Everyone parades the idea that Atlantis equals Santorini obliterated overnight by volcanic fury. This fantasy exploded thanks to sensational Discovery Channel specials and fringe historians hijacking Plato's 4th century BCE dialogues, mashing them with the real Thera eruption, and pitching it like an ancient Marvel villain's origin story. Here's the kicker: Plato placed Atlantis' destruction 9,000 years before his time, while Thera blew its top only about 1,500 years before him. Not 9,000. The 1960s excavations at Akrotiri uncovered no lost superpowers, just a flourishing, typical Bronze Age trading town. If you think Plato watched Santorini erupt, you're probably also convinced George Lucas was a Clone War vet. Keep hunting Atlantis on Google Earth, but don't be shocked when all you find is a GPS dead end to Neverland. These vivid imaginations have influenced Hollywood films portraying true Atlantis imagery. You've been flat out lied to about Atlantis, and Hollywood is the puppet master. Big studios shove CGI temples and glowing pyramids down your throat. But here's the shocker: the real Atlantis is less Indiana Jones, more ancient Greek homework drudgery. If you bought into those flashy, futuristic domes, laser-lit cities, and shiny marble palaces straight from Disney's Atlantis, The Lost Empire, or James Cameron's wild fantasies, you've been duped. Blame those movies and Victorian Atlantis fanboy Ignatius Donnelly, who in the 19th century blew up Plato's story with zero solid evidence. The cold, boring truth. The only original accounts come from Plato's 4th century BCE dialogues Timaeus and Critias, and there's no crystal towers, no viral magic, no alien tech in sight. Archaeology. The 1990s Santorini digs uncovered only broken pottery, no megacities, no force fields, just soggy Bronze Age suburbs. So if you imagined Atlantis surrounded by force fields and cosmic gizmos, congrats, Plato's estate might owe you royalties for all the fiction. Even Elon Musk's SpaceX rockets look more believable than those Lost Empire fantasies. Such portrayals often depict Atlanteans as spiritual masters or even extraterrestrials. You've been flat-out conned. Hollywood and New Age charlatans hijacked Atlantis, twisting Plato's 4th century BCE warning into a cosmic alien resort fantasy. Blame Helena Blavatsky's 19th century theosophy cult. Then watch it explode with UFO hustlers like Eric von Däniken and the never-ending trap of History Channel's Ancient Aliens. Think Atlanteans were galactic masterminds or actual space travelers. If you believe that, you just swallowed clickbait memes, woo-woo TV specials, and those airport paperbacks with glowing blue crystals on the cover hook, line, and sinker. Here's the cold truth. Plato's Timaeus and Critias describe Atlantis as a decadent, corrupt empire doomed by its own hubris, not some ancient wellness retreat for interstellar yoga enthusiasts. Physical proof of advanced tech or aliens? Zero. The so-called submerged ruins off the Bahamas found in the 1960s. Pure pseudo-archaeological junk. If you bought into Atlanteans as space pioneers, congratulations, you owe Netflix your autograph for their next docu-fantasy hit. Adding to the mystery, some believe secret Atlantis texts are hidden by powerful institutions. You've been straight-up duped by Hollywood producers and YouTube hustlers. There are no ancient Atlantean tomes hidden in dusty Vatican vaults, waiting to blow your mind. If you believed secret Atlantis texts are real, you swallowed one massive modern con designed to line someone else's pockets. Everyone loves the fantasy shadowy elites hoarding forbidden Atlantean books packed with lost tech, world-changing secrets, or at least some glowing crystals straight out of a sci-fi flick. Blame this fever dream on 20th century New Age hustlers pushing paperbacks and blockbusters like Disney's Atlantis, The Lost Empire, and the National Treasure movies, not on any actual lost civilization. Here's the hard truth. Plato, the 4th century BCE philosopher, is literally our only ancient source for Atlantis, his Timaeus and Critias dialogues. Every reference since just echoes him, a fact firmly established by 20th century historian Pierre Vidal-Naquet. So congratulations! If you bought the Atlantis myth, you fell for a plot written by grifters and CGI artists, not ancient priests. With advancements in technology, many hold hope that Atlantis could finally be discovered. Hollywood lied Atlantis isn't some lost city waiting for better sonar. It's been found all along, right under your nose. If you believed it's hidden somewhere in the Atlantic, blame 19th century spiritualists and blockbuster directors for feeding you that fantasy. You've seen it everywhere. Disney's glow up, History Channel marathons, every Ancient Mysteries paperback hyping it as a real underwater city lost to time. But here's the cold, boring truth. Plato's original works, Timaeus and Critias, from the 4th century BCE, framed Atlantis as pure political allegory, a morality tale, not a treasure map. No credible ancient historian ever treated it like a real place. Archaeologists digging at Santorini in the late 1960s uncovered actual drowned cities, none matching Plato's magical specs. 19th century Victorians, like Helena Blavatsky in her 1888 The Secret Doctrine, turned Atlantis into spiritual clickbait. Still dreaming of a James Cameron submersible finding Atlantis? Congratulations, you're ghost hunting in a Plato fanfic and about as sane as expecting Hogwarts to show up on Google Maps.